Every powerful family tells the same lie, that their wealth was earned cleanly, that their legacy is built on honor, and that blood will always protect blood. But history tells a different story, one soaked in betrayal, silence, and the kind of greed that rots a soul from the inside. The Caldwell family of Greene County, Georgia, built their fortune on railroads, land deals, and influence that reached into courtrooms and churches alike. Yet beneath the polished image stood a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. By the spring of 1897, the Caldwell estate had begun to decay, not just in cracked columns and overgrown gardens, but in the quiet panic of a family losing control of its own narrative. At the center of this unraveling was Thomas Caldwell III, the only surviving son of Augustus Caldwell, and the man expected to inherit everything, the money, the land, the power, and the sins no ledger dared record. But Thomas did not want the inheritance. He had seen too much. Missing funds, falsified documents, whispered rumors of rivals who vanished after private dinners at the estate. Each discovery pushed him further from the role he was born to play. Those closest to him noticed the change, the questions he asked, the sleepless nights, the way he watched his father with a mixture of fear and disgust. Even his mother warned him to stop, to let the past remain buried. But Thomas refused. He had learned that the Caldwell fortune was protected by a private circle of bankers, judges, preachers, and industrialists, bound together not by loyalty, but by shared guilt. This inner circle did not debate threats, it erased them. Thomas understood that if he stayed silent, he would become one of them. If he spoke, he would become their enemy. And so he chose the path no heir is ever meant to choose. He decided to leave. Quietly, secretly, and permanently, if necessary. Weeks before his 29th birthday, Thomas began preparing his escape. He sold personal items through intermediaries, copied financial records late into the night, and confided only in Elijah Moore, a groundskeeper whose family had worked Caldwell land since before the war, and whose knowledge of the estate ran deeper than its foundations. Elijah later said, Thomas believed the land itself was cursed, that it remembered every crime committed upon it, and that no man could truly own it without paying a price. Still, Thomas believed the truth could cleanse what corruption had poisoned, that exposure could end the cycle. He was wrong. On the night of May 14, 1897, Thomas Caldwell III vanished. His room showed no sign of struggle. His bed was untouched. His boots were gone. The only detail that unsettled even those loyal to the family was the smell of cigar smoke lingering in the hallway. Thomas did not smoke. His father did. So did the men who had dined at the estate that evening. Within hours, explanations appeared almost too quickly. Thomas had been unstable, they said. Drunk, despondent. Perhaps he ran off with a woman. Perhaps worse. Letters surfaced, later proven forged, suggesting despair. The local sheriff, indebted to Caldwell money, declared the case unfortunate but unsurprising. The search was symbolic at best. No real effort was made. Meanwhile, the family lawyer quietly froze accounts and adjusted documents, preparing for a future without an heir. But the silence did not convince everyone. Servants whispered. A carriage was seen leaving the estate long after midnight, heading towards swampland known for swallowing problems whole. Elijah Moore disappeared for 2 days and returned bruised and silent. Mrs. Caldwell retreated into the east wing, drinking heavily, praying at night in a voice neighbors said sounded more like confession than faith. Inside the house, tensions turned venomous, arguments behind locked doors, servants dismissed for asking questions, and a growing fear that Thomas had not run away at all. He'd been removed. As doubt spread beyond the estate, the Caldwells did what powerful families always do. They changed the subject. A grand charity event was announced. Newspapers praised Augustus Caldwell's generosity. Ministers preached sermons about grief, forgiveness, and the cruelty of fate. Sympathy replaced suspicion, at least on the surface. But beneath the carefully maintained illusion, the truth began to leak. A coded letter Thomas had mailed weeks earlier reached a journalist in Savannah. Financial documents surfaced through a rival banker, purchased quietly from a frightened maid. Rumors spread that Thomas had drafted a private will naming beneficiaries outside the family, a direct threat to the estate's survival. The inner circle that had protected the Caldwells for decades began to fracture. Each man feared the others would betray him first. Then came the deaths. A judge collapsed suddenly. A banker drowned under circumstances no one examined too closely. The machinery of power began consuming itself. Years later, fragments of testimony painted a grim picture. Thomas had been lured into the estate's underground storage chamber under the promise of reconciliation. Several men were present. He confronted them with evidence, demanding freedom in exchange for silence. Power does not negotiate with conscience. No body was ever recovered, but sections of swampland were drained and refilled shortly after his disappearance, an expensive project justified as improvement. Elijah Moore left Georgia forever, changed his name, and spoke only once on his deathbed, saying the heir had not been killed in rage but erased with calculation. In time, the Caldwell fortune collapsed under lawsuits and scandal. Augustus died wealthy but disgraced. His wife was institutionalized. The estate changed hands. Official records never acknowledged the truth, because history belongs to those who survive long enough to shape it. Thomas Caldwell III became a footnote, a warning whispered among those who understand that some inheritances are traps. Locals still say the land feels wrong, that fog carries voices across the swamp, and that sometimes a figure stands where the water is darkest, waiting. Because history doesn't disappear, it waits. The Caldwell estate was not just a home, it was an instrument of control. Built decades earlier on land seized through dubious contracts, it was designed to impress from the outside and intimidate within. Long corridors swallowed sound. Rooms were built larger than necessary, making occupants feel small. Servants knew which hallways to avoid at night and which doors were never to be opened. Beneath the main house lay storage chambers and cellars older than the current structure itself, remnants of earlier buildings that had burned or been dismantled without explanation. Thomas knew these spaces well. As a child, he had wandered too far once and been dragged back by his father, who beat him not in anger but in fear. As an adult, Thomas began to understand why. The estate had swallowed more than memories. Workers spoke quietly of bones unearthed during renovations and reburied without ceremony, of wagons arriving at night and leaving empty by morning, of records rooms sealed and resealed over the years as if the past itself needed constant reinforcement to stay buried. Thomas believed the house watched its occupants, absorbing their sins and demanding silence in return. After his disappearance, servants reported strange changes, doors left open that had always been locked, lights flickering in unused wings, footsteps in corridors no one walked anymore. Mrs. Caldwell claimed she heard her son's voice calling her name from the lower levels, begging her to look, to remember, to tell the truth. She was dismissed as hysterical, but fear took root. Even Augustus Caldwell avoided certain rooms, preferring his study late at night, drinking alone, staring at the fireplace as if waiting for something to emerge. The house had outlived generations, and it would outlive them all. It had been built to protect power, and power had fed it well. When Thomas vanished, the estate did not mourn. It closed ranks. And those who remained inside its walls understood one thing clearly. Whatever had happened to the heir, the house had been complicit. The men who protected the Caldwell fortune called themselves businessmen, benefactors, leaders of the community. In truth, they were custodians of a shared secret. For decades they had traded favors, erased debts, manipulated elections, and removed obstacles quietly. Each man held leverage over the others. Documents, witnesses, buried crimes, ensuring loyalty through mutual destruction. Thomas's investigation threatened to expose not just one family, but an entire system. After his disappearance, paranoia replaced confidence. Meetings once held openly moved to private homes. Correspondence became coded. Trust evaporated. When the Savannah journalists began asking questions, panic spread. When financial documents surfaced, accusations followed. Who had leaked them? Who was preparing to run? The first death, a judge collapsing at his desk, was officially ruled natural, but no one believed it. The second, a banker found drowned, confirmed what they all feared. The circle was no longer protected. Whether Thomas had left evidence behind, or someone within the group was turning informant no longer mattered. Survival became the priority. Some men fled the state, others attempted to destroy records, a few tried to bargain with the very system they had helped create. Augustus Caldwell watched it all unravel, powerless to stop it. He had believed himself indispensable. He was wrong. Power had never belonged to him alone. It belonged to the structure, and the structure was collapsing. By the time authorities showed interest, quietly, cautiously, the inner circle was already dissolving, leaving behind deaths that would never be connected and crimes that would never be fully exposed. Thomas had not lived to see it, but his defiance had introduced chaos into a system that depended on silence, and chaos was fatal. Elijah Moore disappeared from official records years before his death. He changed his name, moved north, and worked labor jobs that required no questions and offered no stability. Those who knew him described a man perpetually listening, as if expecting footsteps behind him. He drank little. He trusted no one. Only at the end did he speak. Confined to a narrow bed in a charity hospital, Elijah told a nurse what he had carried for decades. He said Thomas had known the moment he entered the underground chamber that he would not leave. He said the men did not shout or argue. They listened, they calculated, and then they decided. Thomas was not beaten in rage. He was silenced efficiently, methodically, as if removing a faulty component from a machine. Elijah claimed the body was never meant to be found. The land itself was chosen to erase it. When asked why he waited so long to speak, Elijah reportedly laughed. "Because the truth don't save you," he said. His confession never reached a courtroom. It was recorded, archived, and forgotten. No investigations were reopened. No names were formally accused. Power had shifted, but it had not vanished. The machine had adapted. Elijah died 2 days later. His story survived only because someone wrote it down. Thomas Caldwell III did not die a hero, and he did not live long enough to be a martyr. He was a man who asked questions in a system designed to punish curiosity. His disappearance was not an anomaly, it was a warning. Across the country, similar stories exist, buried beneath estates, corporations, trusts, and foundations that still bear respectable names. The Caldwell fortune collapsed, but others rose in its place. The lesson remains the same. Power does not fear morality, it fears exposure. Thomas's story survives because it reveals a pattern. How families protect themselves, how institutions close ranks, how truth is delayed until it loses its power. The Vanishing Heir is not just a ghost of the past. He is a reminder that history is selective, that silence is inherited, and that some legacies are built not to be passed down, but to be defended at any cost. And somewhere, in a town not unlike yours, someone is standing at the edge of a truth they've been warned not to cross. In the end, Thomas Caldwell III did not receive justice, and perhaps that is the most honest part of this story, because justice has never been guaranteed to those who challenge power before the world is ready to listen. His name faded from official records, his disappearance reduced to a footnote, his life quietly absorbed by the same machinery that erased him. The Caldwell estate still stands in fragments, its land divided, its fortune scattered, but the silence that protected it remains familiar, because it exists everywhere, where money speaks louder than memory, where influence rewrites history, and where uncomfortable truths are buried beneath carefully maintained respectability. Stories like this rarely end with arrests or confessions. They end with compromises, with documents sealed, with witnesses forgotten, and with the unspoken understanding that some questions are simply too dangerous to ask out loud. Yet Thomas's story survives because someone remembered, because fragments refuse to disappear, and because silence, no matter how carefully constructed, always leaks. The Vanishing Heir is not just a ghost of one estate in Georgia. He is a symbol of every truth pushed aside to protect a legacy, every voice erased to preserve power, and every warning ignored because facing the past requires courage most systems do not possess. And if this story feels unsettling, it should, because it asks a question that has no comfortable answer. How many other heirs vanished before they could speak? How many fortunes were preserved through fear? And how many truths are still waiting beneath the ground we walk on every day? Somewhere near you, there is a house, a business, a family name that carries a history no one wants uncovered, and the only reason those stories remain hidden is because no one has forced them into the light yet. That is why we tell these stories. Not to sensationalize the past, but to remind ourselves that darkness thrives in silence, and that memory is the first form of resistance. If you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to Hidden Dark World, turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next, and comment your city and the time you're watching right now, because the place you're listening from may hold secrets of its own. Stay tuned, because this was only one chapter, and the Hidden Dark World is far larger, far closer, and far more dangerous than you've been led to believe.